Today you're going to listen to a history of Thanksgiving. As you listen, please fill out your chart that you have been given. To the best of your ability, you can compare answers after the presentation, and we'll listen again so that you can add to your notes. As we begin, I just want to point out that Thanksgiving is celebrated on the fourth Thursday in November, and so the date from year to year changes, but it's always on the fourth Thursday in November, and it's a day of feasting, family, and football. So this is what Americans associate with this Thanksgiving, and of course we eat some traditional foods such as turkey, gravy, stuffing, yams, corn, potatoes, cranberry sauce, and of course pumpkin pie. We're going to look now at a timeline of Thanksgiving, and so here we go. In 1621, we had our first Thanksgiving. The Pilgrims, the settlers, came and celebrated with the Native Americans, and this happened at Plymouth, Massachusetts. Later in this presentation, we'll talk about the name of those Native Americans. In 1630, the settlers observed Thanksgiving again. This time, they did it in New England on July 8th of 1630. In 1777, General George Washington stopped with his army at Valley Forge because it was a very freezing cold winter that year, and he stopped to give his soldiers a day of rest, and they celebrated Thanksgiving. In 1789, George Washington was no longer an army general, but president, and he declared November 26th a national day of thanksgiving and prayer. So before it was a holiday, it was a national day of thanksgiving and prayer. In 1863, it became a federal holiday. President Abraham Lincoln declared Thanksgiving an official holiday on that day, and there's more to come on that later. In 1876, the tradition of football got introduced, and this happened when we had the first intercollegiate football championship game. And intercollegiate means competition between colleges, so this was the college national championship game. In 1924, the tradition of having a parade on Thanksgiving was introduced by the department store Macy's, and this tradition continues to today. Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. In 1934, the National Football League, or professional football, was introduced to Thanksgiving, and this happened between the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears. Those two teams still play on every Thanksgiving, although they don't play against each other. In 1941, the day was established. The fourth Thursday in November became Thanksgiving. And in 1947, the tradition of a presidential pardon happened. A pardon is when the president allows someone to be free or forgiven of their crime. In this case, President Harry Truman pardoned the turkey that was scheduled to be cooked on that day. And still today, modern presidents carry on that tradition of pardoning a turkey. So who invented Thanksgiving? As we said earlier, it was the Pilgrims and the Native Americans at Plymouth, Massachusetts. But the Native American tribe that was part of that were called the Wampanoag. Wampanoag is spelled W-A-M-P-A-N-O-A-G. And they were there to celebrate with the Pilgrims. Why did the Pilgrims celebrate their first Thanksgiving? Well, it was because they had a successful harvest, and they were still new to this world, a new world, and they wanted to demonstrate their thanksgiving to God for a bountiful harvest. And later on, we can see that a man named Edward Winslow, an English leader, attended that. But the food that was eaten on the first Thanksgiving is very different than the food that we ate today. It consisted of fowl, flint corn, squash, porridge, chestnuts, shellfish, and venison, which is another word for deer, These foods are not traditionally thought of as very tasty nowadays. So as the holiday changed, so did the foods that were eaten. When did Thanksgiving become a national holiday? There are two important dates here and two important people. In 1789, America's first president, George Washington, declared the National Day of Thanksgiving and Prayer. And then again in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln made it a federal holiday, but he called it Thanksgiving and Praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. And that is Old English and old ways. Today, we don't see our presidents being very religiously focused. Some common traditions that happen on Thanksgiving. Now we're on the second side of the handout. So many Americans like to practice charity, give back to their communities, and they do this by collecting non-perishable food items, canned food for those who are in need. Many people say special prayers, not only in their homes, but in places of worship. Thanksgiving is another one. Some families like to go around and take turns before they eat, sharing what they're most thankful for or what they're thankful about what happened during the last year. As I mentioned before, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is a big tradition. In my family, the TV is always on in the morning, and we watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. This has been a televised event on NBC. So here in Madison, that's channel 15, and this has happened since 1952. This paragraph describes the route that it takes, but in the parade, you'll see huge balloons of famous characters. You'll see the famous Rockettes of Radio City Music Hall. You'll see high school and college marching bands, musical performers, and at the end, all of the kids are excited to see Santa Claus. Crafts are another tradition that are common with Thanksgiving. Even as a child, I made some and still have a couple somewhere in my home. The kids make turkeys by tracing their hands, pilgrim hats, feathered Indian headdresses, which are now seen as somewhat culturally insensitive, but kids' crafts is still a big part of it. I mentioned football, and when the NFL started playing its first, the football games on Thanksgiving, the first two teams were the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears. I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. Today, nowadays, the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys will play on Thanksgiving. I'm sorry, not the Chicago Bears. The Lions will play at their home field. The Cowboys will play at their home field. And in 2006, a third game was added. America's kind of football crazy, and so Thanksgiving now has 3 games. Another tradition that is common with Thanksgiving is making a wish. And so we take the wishbone, we call it. It's this bone out of the turkey near the neck. And after it's been cooked and dried, 2 people in the family will grab one end of the wishbone and pull it apart. Whoever ends up with the bigger piece of that bone is given a special wish. And I'm not sure if it comes true or not. This tradition dates all the way back to 322 BC. I mentioned the turkey pardoning, and that is not part of this chart, but holiday shopping is. So the day after Thanksgiving has become part of the Thanksgiving holiday. This is called Black Friday, and it's the biggest shopping day of the year. Unfortunately, nowadays, many stores are opening up on Thanksgiving itself. And yeah, unfortunately, that is becoming part of the American tradition too. So again, here's a quick look at the timeline. I will not read through this, but during the presentation, I will pause, and you'll have about 30 seconds to flip your paper back over to the other side and add any notes that you would like to. Okay, so the last section, we are going to look at Thanksgiving by the numbers.